I published earlier today, August 5th, 2025, my weekly blog post discussing most of my trades over the past few days. Those posts, which I have published since October 2008, can be found by clicking my profile, SouthGen, and there's a link there. With the significant decline in intermediate and longer-term interest rates following the dismal BLS July jobs report, which has increased the odds of a Fed rate cut in September, I transitioned this past week to being a net buyer of dividend-paying stocks, focusing mostly on beaten up stocks that have yields over 5%. The primary stock sectors for purchases will be equity REITs, regional banks, BDCs, packaged food, and pharmaceutical companies. I also lightened up slightly on my corporate bond allocation, which is easily the largest allocation I've ever had in that sector now. Maturing in the 2032 to 2035 time frame with one corporate bond maturing in 2055 that I sold. The total amount in par value was $7,000, but I sold them all at premiums to par value, having just recently bought them at discounts. The slight reduction in my intermediate and longer-term corporate bond allocation was done to reduce my interest rate risk. That takes into account as to why my age and also a recognition that the recent decline in intermediate and longer-term interest rates may only be temporary, motivated more by a fear and flight to safety response based on in response to recent economic news, particularly the jobs report, then a change in inflation expectations. Inflation has been moving slightly higher, even with tariff impacts still being at relatively immaterial levels for the reasons I discussed in prior posts and in prior videos. I'm expecting multiple contributors to inflation trending higher as 2025 progresses and into 2026. And if the Fed reduces the federal funds rate when inflation is moving higher, then I would expect intermediate and longer term interest rates to trend higher even as the short term rates trend lower. The government's personal consumption expenditure price index for the 12 months ending in June, reported last week, was at 2.6%, up from 2.3% for the 12 months ending in May 2025. While the annual core PCE price increased to 2.8%, from 2.7% for the 12 months ending in May. It will take time for the inflationary impacts of the Republican tariff taxes to be fully reflected in consumer prices. One significant input cost inflation in the coming months and possibly well into 2026 will be the Republican tariff taxes on imports, particularly the 50% tariff taxes on steel, aluminum, and copper. It is possible that the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit will affirm the decision issued by the three-judge panel of the U.S. International Trade Court, who concluded that Trump lacked the authority to issue any of these reciprocal tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, and I would emphasize the word emergency, which is abbreviated to IEEPA, which includes all of the Republican tariff taxes other than those levied by Trump on specific products, which is done under a different law. EPA does not even mention the word tariff. Even if the lower court decision is affirmed by the appellate court, the injunction issued by that three-judge panel preventing collection of those tariff taxes, which was stayed at the appellate court level, would likely be stayed further by either the appellate court or the U.S. Supreme Court, pending final resolution of the appeal, which would be sometime in 2026. The 6 Republican justices are the foremost proponents of the imperial presidency in the United States in U.S. history, meaning they will create constitutional provisions like the immunity decision that will vest in the president kingly powers that King George would have envied in 1776. So I would not count on any of them to restrain Trump in any meaningful manner. It is hard for me to believe that any Supreme Court justice would interpret a law that does not even mention the word tariff to constitute a delegation of Congress's constitutional power to set tariffs contained in Article 1 of the Constitution to the President. If that was intended, they could include the word tariff, and then it would be a question of whether they could delegate that power to the president, except on a temporary and emergency basis. And this power that Trump is exercising under that act that doesn't even mention the word tariff is not done on an emergency or temporary basis to protect national security, as contemplated by EPA, but permanently for all countries in the world, and then changing them up and down or whatever at his whim. Congress has the constitutional power to impose tariffs, not the president in Article 2. He is not given that power at all, but the Republicans have refused to vote on any tariff imposed by Trump. They have specifically refused to vote on it. But if there are any justices in American history who would interpret EPA to grant Trump that power, the 6 Republican justices that we now have would be the only ones who would do it, in my opinion. If they allow Trump to use that act to impose permanent tariffs on all foreign countries and then change them whenever he so desires, then they have gone full throttle into the authoritarian rabbit hole.